Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Safe House. I'm Jeff Edwards, co-founder of Safe House Initiative and your host for today's podcast. Enjoy. We finished season 2 with an amazing summer series on cyber insurance. Tawana Johnson, my co-host, I'll tell you what, her and her guest peeled back the inner workings of the cyber insurance ecosystem and the value it provides. The one question that we still don't have a real answer to is why only about 4% of small, mid-sized businesses have a standalone cyber policy. All that we learned through the summer, you'd think, boy, it sure makes a lot of sense to have one. Well, today we're going to kind of dig into it and see if we can get some more definitive answers to this question. So I'm really excited to welcome back for a second appearance, actually, Eric Cernak, back to the show. Eric, hey, welcome back.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. Glad to be back and looking forward to today's discussion.
Yeah, you're regarded in the industry as really a pioneer especially for small, mid-sized businesses, the cyber insurance policies, and you're going to kind of go back and whittle it down where there's probably 3 or 4 or 5 things that probably come top of mind for you that we can discuss to say, here's probably why it's a low uptake in the small, mid-sized arena for cyber policies. Does that kind of reflect what we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, I think that's very fair. I think, there are 4 or 5 things that come to mind quite easily on this topic. And I think some are a combination of older items and some things that are newer kind of coming into the environment as a result of kind of current events.
Okay, well, since it's been about a year now, almost exactly a year, because you kicked off our season last year, season 2. Didn't realize that until I was going back through our notes, and it's like, hey, Eric's back for the second time, and he's kicking off the next season again. So now, why don't you introduce yourself to the new listeners, because we have a lot of new listeners over the past year, and how did you? What was your journey getting to be the head of the cyber insurance organization within the Hanover Insurance Group?
Yeah, no, so it's been a fascinating journey for me. I've been in the cyber insurance space probably 20 plus years now. So it's been real interesting to see how the market has evolved and see the changes, not only to the exposures and the risks faced by small and medium-sized businesses in particular, but also as how the industry has worked on responding to those needs. And so I grew up, managing projects in this space, and then started taking on some additional responsibilities and leading business units and centers of excellence. And now that's what I do here now at Hanover is lead both a business unit and the center of excellence. So it's something that's near and dear to my heart, and always looking for ways to help small and medium-sized businesses be even more secure in today's environment.
Yeah, so small and mid-sized businesses, that it's the kind of the foundation of our economy, and we want to do all we can to help them. So, but there's some things that why wouldn't there be a larger acceptance of standalone cyber policies? That's something that's perplexed me. And once I've learned that, and I was like, so Eric, can you kind of share with us, because you grew up with it, you helped develop this industry. Why is it? What are the roadblocks, you think?
Yeah, no. So I think first and foremost, there may be a belief, especially with small and medium-sized businesses, or SMBs as they're often referred to, that threat actors don't really have an interest in my business. I'm small, I'm not a good target. And, since the introduction of cyber insurance, as I said, more than 20 years ago, that's been a common refrain. It won't happen to me. And generally they just, those business owners believe their size is of no importance, let's say, to the targeted threat actors. The threat actors are going to be busy looking, going proverbial whale hunting, and that they're only interested in expending a large effort to attack and infiltrate those larger companies that either have substantial intellectual property or revenues that they can, look to gain access to. And so I think that is kind of where this all started. And while there may have been some credence to that belief 20 years ago or so, the threat actors have adapted and adopted new technologies to make such attacks much more economical. And so, there's now this entire ecosystem of threat actors that range from those folks that focus simply on gaining access to systems. There's those that run, essentially black market marketplaces to sell that access. And then you ultimately have the threat actors that are going to use that access and carry out the attacks. And you layer on top of that the introduction of mass scanning tools and obviously generative AI. The cost to attack these smaller organizations continues to drop. And so that makes everyone really a potential target at this point.
So it's really a crime of, just convenience.
Yeah, it's really about convenience and opportunity. Right? They're going to be very opportunistic in looking to carry those out. And then when you layer that on top, you layer on top of that a lot of businesses might say, well, I don't have any personally identifying information. That's really where cyber insurance had started, was responding to breaches of PII or personally identifying information. And so there's this misconception that the coverage is still predominantly focused on responding to data breaches and providing response coverage and services. So they don't think that they're, if I'm not in healthcare, I'm not in retail, they may believe that there is limited value because they don't have a large quantity of the protected health information or the personally identifying information. So that's kind of one of the things that we will hear or see a lot. And I think that view, quite frankly, is outdated. Coverages have evolved over the last 20 years, and it's now typical for a cyber policy to respond not only to those breach costs that are associated with an incident involving PII, but it now extends to supply chain outages and fraud losses. And so really it makes the coverage valuable to all risks that are using the computer. And let's face it, in today's day and age, that's pretty much everybody.
Yeah, with all the, with AI and all the tools and the cost of penetrating, and now it sounds like they're organizing into specialties. Is that did I hear that correctly?
Yeah,
the threat actors.
That's exactly what the threat actors are doing. Everybody, they become more efficient in breaking down kind of their own supply chain, if you will. And so they've organized, and they are basically run like corporations at this point. And each one has a specialty that they're focused on, and thus making them most efficient at the thing that they are targeting in terms of carrying out the potential attack. And so it's that level of specialization that also helps, break down cost barriers for them.
Well, they also know that the SMBs are an important part of the food chain of sorts, and supply chain and otherwise, and they're probably the easiest because of their lack of budgets and their lack of preparedness, right?
Yeah, and that's another great point. Sometimes an SMB might get attacked not because of what they have, but let's say of who they know, right? Who are they doing business with? And so that often can drive that. And to your point, SMBs tend to have a more limited budget. And when you look at an insurance spend today of an SMB, it's a challenging environment for them, right? Given the impact of litigation financing on liability premiums, and obviously the dynamic weather and cat environments that we're seeing, and the impact on property premiums, makes for a very dynamic insurance market for these standard lines. And that makes companies have to make some very tough calls and decisions with respects to how they're going to allocate the dollars they have available to buy insurance. So this can lead to an SMB prioritizing their liability and their property insurance coverage over, say, their cyber insurance, even though a cyber incident may be far more devastating and likely based on what they're doing. So unfortunately, cyber insurance becomes more of a discretionary spend, especially when we consider the mindset that I just mentioned. It won't happen to me type of mindset. So I think it takes a little bit of a shifting of mindset too at this point.
Interesting. But so where do like SMBs turn to gain advice, or do they have to hire somebody special, or because I would think that an insurance policy would include something like that. Maybe not.
Yeah, and so that's a great question, and I think there's probably two threads to pull on that. First and foremost, there's a couple places where they can turn to look for advice. I think when you think about it, the exposures that they're faced are going to continue to be emergent. There's going to be things today that weren't there yesterday, and it's going to evolve at the speed of technology. And so the coverages available can be confusing. You have admitted coverage, non-admitted coverage, you have warranty-based solutions in the marketplace. And to your point, services can vary widely from carrier to carrier, as well as coverages. And different names are used for similar coverages, and there might be varied appetite to, an approach to pricing. And so, with that as the backdrop, they can kind of turn to maybe two different places. One is going to be if they're using, say, a managed service provider to help them handle their, technical needs. But those folks are going to be generally focused on the products and the services. And so there's, it's going to stop at a certain place. Independent insurance agents are another place that they can turn, and they've got a lot on their plate too. So, they're being turned to be a trusted advisor on any number of risks, ranging from property to liability to auto to workers' comp. And, sometimes agents may not be as comfortable discussing the cyber exposures and coverages as they are with more traditional coverages. So I think there's a challenge there. Those are the two main places where I could see, small businesses turning for some help.
Well, in terms of the, is it because the technical orientation of cyber that causes maybe some of the agents to shy away a bit, or they're intimidated, or they just don't know or not educated well enough potentially?
I think it's a couple of different things, right? One is the speed, to your point, that technology has and does evolve. And so, again, they've got a lot of different things they have to worry about in different ways to advise their customers. And so keeping up to speed on something that's evolving as quickly as cyber exposure can be very challenging for them. I think the other things that drives some of the challenge is just simply that when they're looking at the various coverage forms that are out there, there's different names for the same coverage, or there might be slightly different. And so how do they advise, their clients best on what needs to be done? So I think, with those two things in mind, I look at this as a, from the carrier perspective, and I say we need to help our independent agent partners be confident and more comfortable explaining the coverage and how it's going to evolve or respond to evolving exposures. And I think agents now are more comfortable explaining why coverage is needed. When I look back, 10 years ago, and perhaps overcoming some of the objections that may be, that they hear often, i.e. the it won't happen to me type of approach. I think they can work with that, but I see that being a big challenge. And I will say that I've seen several independent agents start up more of a cyber practice where they've got dedicated people focused on not only the current market conditions, but also the products and the terminology used in those products and the exposures facing various classes of business. So they'll know how best to craft something or what to recommend for a retail operation versus a manufacturer versus a service organization. And so we are seeing, and I'm seeing, a vast improvement there as well in terms of their level of expertise, but it's a process.
Yeah. Well, and I heard several times during our summer series with our guests that, and it's not a technical conversation, it should be a business conversation. It sounds like that's what the agents are gravitating towards, is more of a business rationale, and as opposed to a technical justification.
Yeah, I think it's, when helping advise and talk about the specific coverages that might be needed for a specific risk, that's really where they're focused on. But I do think they also, build up their technical prowess, because they're going to have to help that SMB generally answer questions on an application for cyber insurance. So they're going to have to be able to explain to their customer, what does this mean? How should you think about this and craft your answer to it such that it is reflective of your current technological environment. So while they don't need to be technology practitioners, they do need to be conversant in it to help their customer kind of navigate the purchasing process.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things I heard too in this conversations this summer. It was about over the past several years, the process of onboarding or issuing cyber policies and the data collection to see what controls are in place by the underwriting teams have changed. They've become much more stringent, and the process to get a cyber policy is not just a check a box on a PDF, which caused later on a lot of claims to be not paid out. And so sometimes there may be a perception, possibly, and this I'm just speculating now, that when I need my cyber policy to pay out, it won't be there because something, I didn't do something right. Is that an issue at all?
Yeah, I think there is still the potential for that misconception that coverage may not be there when, I need it as a small business owner.
Mhm.
I think there's always that concern from a consumer when you're talking about any line of insurance business, quite frankly. I think
Sure.
in cyber, it may have remained a little bit more popular because there were a few highly publicized incidents where claims for cyber losses were brought against policies. But, in those instances, the policies weren't explicitly designed to cover the cyber
Mhm.
exposure. And so as a result, it generated several potentially misleading headlines stating that cyber policies don't pay. And so I think that misconception has just kind of festered a little bit.
Yeah.
I would say I would say contrary to what most cyber carriers want. They want to encourage their insureds to err on the side of over-reporting possible cyber claims because the
Yeah.
earlier they can be involved and trigger their panel of experts, better odds of limiting the damage to the insured, which is the outcome everybody wants. So I kind of bristle a little bit at that misconception, but it is something that we do hear
Yeah.
and continue to hear. But I think people are working hard to dissuade that from the actual reality.
Yeah, and the early, as soon as you can report it, do report it to your insurance company. And I heard that several times this summer too, because it does mitigate the legal aspects we heard from the lawyers later down the road.
Yeah, and I think there's also some trepidation that reporting a claim might be held against them,
Yeah,
come renewal time.
yeah,
And
yeah.
again, I can't stress enough, the early reporting of incidents that may ultimately become a claim, it really affords us a better opportunity to engage those recovery services and address the situation before it gets, to a much larger issue. And to me, that's a sign that the SMB is being vigilant relative to their cyber hygiene. So I view it as a good thing.
Yeah. So with such a low take-up rate for just standalone cyber policies, insurance in general is 90 odd percent of every business, or 100% really has some form of insurance. So I would imagine that some people probably say, well, I don't need it because it's covered in another part of my policy somewhere else. Is that maybe a misconception?
No, I think that's, an unfortunate reality.
Mm,
I think a lot of SMBs may often think that they do have some level of cyber coverage somewhere else. And
mm,
oftentimes that may be the case. For example, many may have what they call a kind of a bolt-on to say their business owner's policy or their commercial package policy. And these can be good starter coverages, as I refer to
mm,
them.
mhm.
But as those businesses grow, they really should work with their independent insurance agent to make sure that the coverages afforded in the bolt-on policies really meet their evolving needs. And, for example, many of these bolt-on coverages may not respond to, say, social engineering events or cost to replace damaged or corrupted equipment as part of a ransomware attack. Those are coverages you're going to generally find more in a standalone policy. But if you had that bolt-on coverage, you may think you have cover for that.
Mm,
The other thing is that these bolt-on coverages generally offer limits maybe up to only $100,000. And again, while that may
mm.
be enough to get the business kind of started and growing, they really need to review what limits they have available, or should be purchasing. And that's best done again with their independent insurance agent because they're going to know the risks associated with that business. And then I'd say lastly, with respects to that, kind of in the differences there is you may get a different level of service on the bolt-on than you do a standalone. So some of those
Right.
proactive or reactive services may not be bundled with the bolt-on as they are with stand-on. So I think they have a place. They're good to get people started, but I do think it can sometimes lead to an overinflated sense of security and a reluctance to make kind of that upgrade to a full-blown standalone cyber policy.
Yeah, and for part of the risk transfer, the financial part of the policy, but it's all these services that are provided, the proactive and the preventative and the remediation type services. I found very fascinating, as I didn't realize there were so many of those offered by most insurance policies, cyber insurance policies.
Yeah, it's really something that's caught on, especially over the last probably 3 to 5 years, especially on the proactive side. And I think it is a significant value and service to the end, insured and customer, because let's face it, if you had to go find a technical solution for something, you could get overwhelmed when you do an internet search on say, multi-factor authentication. Where do I start? What do I need to do?
Yeah.
But if you've got a trusted partner like your insurance carrier, saying, hey, here are 3 to 5, recommendations or suggested, services.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, you might get a discount. And oh, by the way, we view that positively as we look to underwrite. I think that adds a lot to the value equation beyond just the risk transfer element.
Yeah, and then there's probably some are maybe self-insuring in some form or fashion, or they may have warranties. So I hear a lot about warranties. It's kind of a mixed bag of responses on warranties. Do you have any thoughts or ideas on that may be taking mind share?
Yeah, I do think it's just another area that's been growing lately, and I think it does add to potentially some of the confusion, right? Like we talked about.
Yeah.
Do I have it under an endorsement? Do I have it? What do I have for coverages? Is the one carrier calls a coverage something, another carrier calls it something else. And now you throw warranties into the mix, and it's not unlikely that an SMB may have a warranty that guarantees, let's say some level of protection against cyber incidents.
Yeah.
I think the challenge with these is, while they can be a valuable resource to the SMB and their overall cyber response plan, you got to read the fine print, right?
Yeah.
Often these warranties are going to be specific only to incidents that may be specific to that particular service that was offered by the provider granting the warranty. So in other words, types of incidents could be very narrowly defined. And so you need to just, again, read that fine print and think through what is actually being protected there, because the scope of protection may often be much narrower than coverages provided on a standalone policy. So again, the kind of that, overinflated sense of protection there, that while there is some there and it can be valuable, it's not going to be as holistic as if you were to buy a full-blown standalone policy.
Wow. Yeah. Anything else that you can think of offhand before I ask another question?
I mean, I think, we kind of hit on the 5 main things that, I kind of view as being stumbling blocks, right? I got coverage someplace else. It's, they don't, threat actors don't have an issue with my business. I'm not going to be a target. The proverbial, it's not going to happen to me. I've got a limited budget. I don't know where to turn for advice. It's very confusing. And then kind of that misconception that the coverage won't be there when we need it. So those are really the 5 main areas that we have seen. And like I said, some of those, go back to the start of the coverage 20 years ago. And some of those are newer within the last, 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've seen it all grow up. You helped develop it within the industry. Yeah. So, Eric, if there's one thing our listeners could do today that would improve their overall risk situation, what would that one thing be?
In my mind, it's always good to ask questions, and I think that's what you need to do if you're concerned about your cyber hygiene and the protection that you might have as a small business owner. I can't encourage folks to ask questions. If you're working with a managed service provider, schedule time to sit down with them and find out what's available to them. What are they doing, providing for protections? What warranties might be part of those services that they're already purchasing, and then conversely sit down with their independent insurance agent and say, okay, what do we have for coverage? Do I have a standalone? Do I have an endorsement? I've heard things about social engineering and Gen I making it, more effective from a threat actor perspective. How am I being protected? So I think the biggest thing is not being lulled into a false sense of security and being inquisitive and asking questions, because you really do have to, take it into your own hands, and advocate for yourself when you're looking for protection on this front.
I'm going to add one thing too to that. That's great advice. Last year, your advice was just get started.
That too, yes. Just
And
get
I
started
love
by
that.
asking questions, Jeff.
There you go. That's a 2-season special right there. Well, Eric, as always, and if you want to come back for the season close next year, the door is wide open for you, buddy.
I appreciate that. I may have to take you up on that offer.
All right. Well, I'll make sure we talk in the summertime. But in the meantime, on behalf of the Safe House Initiative and all of our listeners, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your thoughts.
Anytime, Jeff. I really do like talking about this stuff, and anytime I get a chance to help people, that's what we're looking to do.
Excellent. And we're of like minds there, my friend. Have a great day.
You do the same.
That's our episode. We greatly appreciate you joining us and hope it was a wonderful learning experience. I'm your host, Jeff Edwards, and remember, be safe, be resilient, and be kind to each other. For more educational materials, please visit us at safehouseinitiative.org. All materials are free from tracking, promotions, memberships, or fees of any kind. Safe House Initiative is an all-volunteer organization.